Please welcome Brad Garlinghouse of Ripple, Billy Holt of TradeWeb, and Jackie Alemany of MS Now News.
All right, let's get started. We don't have that much time. Brad, Billy, thank you so much for being here today. Both of you are currently building institutional infrastructure for markets that operate faster and with better signal, but from different sides of the universe. Policy is obviously the last thing that usually happens, but right now, at least in my view, it maybe not be something that you two are both waiting on to sort of unlock the next steps of your businesses. And the two things I'm thinking about primarily, and our audience probably already knows this, the Clarity Act and prediction markets. And so I'm wondering to both of you, just to kick things off, before we get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of what those policies actually look like, but are you building ahead of the policy or are you waiting for it right now?
Happy 11th anniversary.
What Billy's referring to today happens to be our 11th anniversary at Team Ripple, which I'm happy about. But
happy anniversary.
I've seen a lot, and one of the things that I think you're referring to here, look, we obviously had a long, protracted battle with the United States government, the Securities Exchange Commission, and during that time, we just kept building. And to your point, or even around Clarity Act, the U.S. is not the leader here. And we have, for a long time, most of our hiring was outside the United States, most of our customers are outside the United States, and other jurisdictions leaned into regulatory clarity early. And I'm not talking about small markets, I'm talking about Japan, I'm talking about the UAE, I'm talking about Singapore, major financial capitals of the world, where the regulators engaged and embraced this is new technology that can rewire financial infrastructure, and that can be good for the local economy. So we've kept building. We hope the Clarity Act, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but we hope the Clarity Act happens, but we certainly have kept building during this kind of time of not quite certain clarity.
Got to keep building for sure. That's exactly right. I think pattern recognition around all of these things is really important. So we have a ton of DNA specifically around Dodd-Frank and how derivatives regulation was put into the swaps market. I think as this room knows really well, the swaps market was, in the global markets world, it was like the most back alley, paper-intensive market. We had seen a bunch of other markets that we were in go electronic, and we invested a lot ahead of regulation, and then wound up becoming pretty big winners once there became that clarity that I think is extremely important. I think ambiguity, when you have technology change on the horizon, with a bunch of really smart, ambitious people is a bad idea. And once you get that clarity, I think you're off to a much better place. So you got to build ahead of it for sure.
So then first, I have a lot of follow-ups for you, Brad, but I want to jump off of some of the things you just said and talk more specifically about the partnership that you have announced with Kalshi. I believe that was in February. And talk a little bit more about how you make the right bets on innovation ahead of policy being very clear, right? Because right now, a lot of Democrats especially are talking about trying to regulate these betting markets. Yeah. But you right now are at least just using it from a data perspective. Is there any possibility going forward where...
It's a small bet for us. I mean, their headlines, their marketing is amazing, but it's a small bet. It's a small bet for us. We think it's smart. We think it's a matter of time before the financial predictive markets. And I think it's really important that I say that financially oriented predictive markets become more mainstream in terms of the pricing of macro risk in the market. We think it's a matter of time before the big banks and the really intelligent non-bank liquidity providers are using that kind of information when they're pricing all different types of macro risk. That's a base case that we have. Whether or not it moves to how we think about at TradeWeb an institutional market where BlackRock clicks a button and a bank provides a market on a predictive orientation, we'll see. What I would say is we've gotten tremendous amount of interest around how we integrate predictive markets, from some of our biggest, most sophisticated clients, which is a good start as you're really kind of trying to invest for the future around this.
So what would you say would be the impetus for you to go further and introduce those trading capabilities?
More regulatory clarity around it for sure, and then the kind of sort of sponsorship that we've traditionally had as we've built the markets in our company from the right kind of players in the market, and we're really doing a lot of roll up the sleeves work and just trying to understand how would the cadence of the protocols work. It's an exciting time, obviously, around that space. And for us, with the kind of clients we have, it's a really nice combination.
Yeah, and I want to put a pin in the innovation part of the combo and get back to that in a little bit. But Brad, can we dig a little bit more into the Clarity Act? You have been fairly optimistic about it. I'm wondering, in light of this joint interpretive framework that was just announced last week or the week before by the CFTC and the SEC, if you feel like the timeline to get the Clarity Act done is now expedited, or if in your conversations you're hearing that lawmakers are now going to kick it even further down the road because they have a little more time now.
Yeah. Look, I think what happened 2 weeks ago with the SEC and CFTC coming together with a joint statement was truly groundbreaking in a bunch of ways. And from my point of view, it ended an era of lawfare against this industry, which turns out didn't have the support of what the law actually said. So I think that was profound. But I also think we have to recognize that without codified legislative permanence, you still have the risk that the next version of the SEC comes back to Gensler's unlawful war on crypto. And I think that's bad for the United States. I think it's bad policy. It's also bad politics. And what we've seen certainly as we come up to midterms is being anti-crypto doesn't get you any votes. There's a lot of people who care about this industry, who are directly or indirectly involved. And I think that's why some of the voter education in the last cycle was impactful. So I am still optimistic, the Clarity Act. I think it does still matter despite the CFTC and SEC coming together. I think the time is now. I would say I'm probably not quite as optimistic as I once was, but some of the smartest people and Washington insiders that I know have said to me, when people are at their peak frustration, that's when they finally compromise and it gets done. I think we're there. So hopefully soon. And Senator Hagerty has spoken out and said that he expects it to move through the Banking Committee in April. So that would be profound. And I remain optimistic.
When you talk about voter education, it's not just voter education, though, right? It's also a lot of lawmaker education.
For sure.
Right? I mean, can you share a little bit without naming names? Can you take us into the room?
Names. I'm not afraid
about,
of
that. What those meetings look like, how elementary you have to be when you're talking to people about this? Because something really interesting I thought you said in a recent interview was that you felt like this push to ban crypto was like akin to lawmakers calling on people to ban email when the internet was coming of age.
Yeah. Well, I think that gets to the heart of I don't really, genuinely I say this, I don't understand how this became partisan. This is just a technology. How you apply the technology, okay, I get how you can be partisan about that, but this is just technology. And so the example I gave was why would somebody be anti-email? Why would you be anti? Now, it turns out we have had, and while this became partisan kind of towards Democrats not supporting some of this and being anti-crypto, and I really think that started with Senator Warren raising, and she had a whole thing about raising an anti-crypto army, and I just remember thinking, why? What? I didn't get it. What problem was she trying to address? Now, I think, fortunately, through education and through just understanding, I think voters will. You've seen, 78 Democrats supported the Clarity Act when it came out of the House last summer. And so it has become more bipartisan, but I still think I don't understand why it ever became so partisan in that regard.
He's right. I mean, just the concept, though, of what you were mentioning, just around having to simplify, I think is really important. When we were going through, the real kind of the real heavy lifting around the derivatives regulation, you cannot imagine what some of those conversations were like, which was this is what, principal counterparty risk is. When there's a buyer, by definition, the other side of the trade is the seller. And if there weren't sort of those kinds of specifics on the table, that entire work that we did around the regulation would have changed the arc of the derivatives business. So there's a lot at stake on these things, but the reality is simplifying it and talking through the issues in very clear ways becomes really important.
Going into 2028 midterms, how would you characterize the change of posture from Democrats towards crypto, and even looking further ahead to 2028 presidential primary?
Well, I mean, I still think you have some holdouts that I don't quite get it, why they're still anti-crypto. Again, because it's bad policy, it's bad politics, like I don't get it. But there still are some holdouts that are on that side. But in general, I think people have realized that this is an industry that's here to stay. The capital involved is tremendous. The ability to leverage these technologies by scaled institutions, because we're really still at the earliest innings. We talk a lot about it, but the biggest financial institutions in the world are just starting their journey into, either from an infrastructure point of view or from a trading point of view. They're really just starting that journey. And I think that's why I'm so optimistic about the future. And again, whether it's the CFTC and SEC coming out and making, publishing, hey, okay, here's how we're going to look at this, or getting it codified through the Clarity Act, I think is great progress in the United States.
Yeah, Billy, can you actually talk a little bit more about what this piece of legislation getting done actually looks like from the perspective of a market infrastructure?
It's going to allow
CEOs?
the institutional market makers to put the investments in that they need for this market to become more of a mainstream institutional business. And some of the best conversations I've had over the past few months have been with like the smartest guys in the market that have said to me, hey Billy, like you're in government bonds, mortgage-backed securities, global swaps, all these important markets. Your clients are going to continue to need exposure to crypto, silver, gold, Mag 7 stocks. The entire framework around exposure in the macro world is changing. For us, that's just like massive opportunity, and we for sure think about crypto as one of the more important places to be around it. As a public company, continuing to focus on your kind of legacy businesses, but at the same time invest in the future is obviously a really important thing. And from my perspective, there's just like no doubt that that's the direction of travel.
Well, that's the perfect segue. Obviously, Kalshi is a bet on the future, but I'm wondering how else you think the next generation is going to be accessing liquidity and data.
How's like the next generation of traders going to access markets, right? And I was lucky enough to be at a March Madness basketball game like on a Friday night. The traders that were on their phones following oil markets at 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night, like that's where all of this is obviously going. I've had to kind of fight through kind of old school mentality, right? Like the bond market was the most old school market that exists. We're in a new kind of world now. And so the opportunities around tokenization, around collateral management inside of fixed income, these are all like really, really interesting moments for pretty big changes to occur. I would argue the TBA mortgage market is one of the most important markets in the world at various points in the interest rate cycle. If we all kind of got together and talked about like how the settlement of that market actually works with faxes and pools and just like crazy amounts of manual work, the collateral management changes that are going to come are big, and they're really good for the health of these markets.
You're nodding your head vigorously.
More efficient markets are good for everybody. Like, if a market is inefficient, it means there's a tax that's extracting value. And I say that either by not just financial value, but also speed. The faster things are operating, the better it is for the participants.
Velocity,
and so, velocity matters. And I think we underestimate how consequential it'll be as the rewiring happens. And again, I will highlight again, the United States is behind. The other countries around the world, because they leaned into clarity around regulation and how these different technologies would be regulated, allowed them to jumpstart where the United States is. And I think we're hopefully, with the Clarity Act, going to catch up. But when I still go talk to senior people at U.S. financial institutions, they're still cautious because there might be another Gary Gensler that comes along and decides, I'm going to declare war on this industry.
How much progress since the Trump administration came into power do you think the U.S. has made in becoming a leader in this industry?
Well, I think the evidence is the SEC and CFTC making a joint statement about, hey, here's how we're going to look at these. I think it was 15 or 16 different tokens, and it was very clear. So I think there's been progress. And the Genius Act, which is the Stablecoin Act, which passed last summer, was codified legislative progress. But again, I think we're not quite there, and that's the reason why the time is now for the Clarity Act. And I think there's key senatorial leadership that is pushing for that, and we'll see if we get there soon. And because now is the time. If it doesn't happen before midterms, I think it's going to get...
If you think about how some of these legacy banks got through some of the teeth of some of this crazy regulation that happened after the crisis, just take a look at at Goldman's earnings today, like incredible numbers. I mean, that firm's ability to navigate through massive volatility in the marketplaces the way that they did is a big deal. I'm not sure that would have been the case, not that long ago. So that's a good view into, as we've kind of gotten a little bit past some of the more onerous pieces of regulation inside of the global markets world, you can see how well some of these banks are doing navigating through real volatile marketplaces.
And Brad, back to the innovation part of this, can you walk us through what your process for identifying next innovative steps for Ripple?
Well, so one key example here is, Ripple acquired a company in Q4 last year called G-Treasury. G-Treasury orchestrates about $13 trillion of payments. 0% of those today go through either stablecoin or crypto in terms of settlement. So the opportunity set is, okay, how do we gently introduce, and what they're really doing is for a CFO, here's a dashboard of your global liquidity, whether it's in yen, euro, Sing dollar, Australian dollar, here's a global view, let's let them move it easily into, out of, and that business on a standalone basis has been growing phenomenally quickly, and now there's an opportunity to integrate both Ripple Ripple Prime, or Prime brokerage services, as well as the payments businesses, and Ripple stablecoin. So, and actually, Billy was talking about the collateral management, the feasibility of using collateral that is much more easily moved is a big deal, and I think will create a lot of tailwinds for the crypto industry.
And before we are out of time, because I see someone lurking for us to get off the stage, but as you just noted, both of you have had fairly aggressive M&A strategies. What is the current strategy, and what does the rest of 2026 look like?
We're mostly builders. We've mostly gotten here by kind of building markets out. That being said, it's like, from my perspective, like super opportunistic. We have a pretty good hand right now, and we're going to look for the right kind of partners, particularly around a network that we think we can kind of grow businesses and grow markets with. We love to build stuff, but that being said, I think this is a moment to be pretty opportunistic around who your partners are.
Brad?
Same. We bought 2 companies last year, both for over $1 billion. And so our view this year is integrate, digest, demonstrate that those are working. So far, early indications are very, very positive. We like working with companies like Billy's, and we continue to grow kind of from where we are.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Great.